think that mindset of learning, no matter what age, what generation, if we can all go in with that mindset, we'll get so much more out of everything,
Exactly.
including generational things.
I think bringing like that positive attitude to the work culture like is what we are talking about.
So I want to start with an analogy. Like for me, the right strategy is like a ribbon cake.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Tech Chronicles podcast. Today's topic is an interesting one. We will be discussing bridging the gap, thriving in multi generational teams. We want to talk about why do multi generation teams matter. We want to understand the generational differences. We'll then discuss strategies for success, and we'll end with some real world examples, as we always do. Today, we're very fortunate to have a very special guest with us today. We have Denali David. Do you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi.
Denali is very humble. There's a wealth of knowledge and experience in business growth and digital transformation. She's currently the director of AWP Group in Sri Lanka and was a senior business development manager at Telstra. She has an outstanding reputation for strategic leadership and business growth. And as a result, she is the winner of the Women in Technology Western Australia, among others. Right now, she is the founder and managing director of Lemon App. And Lemon App won Australian National Employment Association's Best New Business Award in 23. That's so awesome. Congratulations. We're honored to have you.
Thank you, Roshan. Lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
For sure. All right, let's get started. Actually, before we get started, right, we want to get into something. We want to understand what does Astro bring to the team? To Lemon App. What does Astro bring to Lemon App?
What's,
We found
what's
him. We
the,
found him on your page.
he's been given a role. What's his title? He's got a business title.
He's Chief Disruption Officer.
It's all in the name. So he barks at like every single meeting. He'll start barking, and the whole meeting comes to a halt until he's done. Whenever someone passes by, so he does his job so well. He's like the most productive member of the team.
That
And I,
is
and I suggest that for listeners, if you want to know more about Astro, you should go to Lemon app and find out.
awesome. All right. Okay, let's get started. So, why do multi-generational teams matter nowadays?
Started. So, when I run like a project or when I manage my team, I always like to start with the end in mind. Like, I want to think about like what does the success look like. So I think we are working in a multi-generational world today where you can have up to 4 or 5 different generations working in the same organization, same team, or same program. And end of the day, you want to make sure that the team members are engaged, right? And you want to have a productive, a workplace, and you want to make sure there are shared goals and objectives with them. So I think in order to accomplish this and working across the differences that different team members bring, it's important that we understand what multi generations bring to the table.
100% with you. I mean, there's a saying, right? Diversity breeds creativity, right? When you have different people from different generations bringing in different ideas, obviously the solution that you come up with is better. And that's right now, that's the status quo, right? In our work environment. So, what else?
No, I think the different skill sets and worldviews that come from depending on which generation, like my dad and I work really well together most of the time because he brings such a wealth of experience to the table. And he's got such an established network because we're talking about 40 plus years of career, and he's built a kind of reputation that I can't dream of building in my short career. And so then I bring, I suppose, more savvy, more plugged into what's happening now, but also more aware and more plugged in to what's coming in the future, as plugged in as we can be. And so the two of us together, we're like, it's so powerful. And there's a lot of people that have wanted to partner with us, but only if we come in together. And another example would be when we were selling my house, I got my younger son Ethan involved to create an AI generated video, like a sales video of the house, and it was so powerful for the sale of our house. So even the family, like, we can be a team really well.
I love that. That is awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think just like from a well-rounded approach point of view, right? Like the multi-generational concept or like the presence itself would bring that multi-perspective views as well as like approaches to the day-to-day picture, right? Like so in like when we started our career, like we had to do like a lot of research either to like what has happened, like what's happening out there, like what's more relevant. Nowadays, like it's like already available within the teams because they come from like different generations, like the approaches are different. So that aspect is kind of baked in, like so it's a great competitive advantage compared to like how things used to be.
One more thing I want to add is that if you think about customers, so a workplace that mirrors the diversity of the customers it serves helps, understand and serve those different demographics. I think that is also very, very important, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Let's talk about understand these generational differences. That should be fun.
Definitely. I think before we talk about like in the context of the generational differences, right? First, we need to understand, I think, why generation these cohorts exist. Who even come up with these cohorts? Like, who created this, right? We can't blindly reference without understanding the origin of those. So in the US, at least, there are some organizations like, there are think tank called Pew, research center based out of DC that came up like who's pioneering the generational, cohorts in the US. But there are other generational cohorts that exist in other countries, like in China, in Germany, in Japan. So because they are driven by social, economical, and technological events. So there's no one size fit all across the world. So I think that's one thing you need to understand. I think if there is any generation, probably the Generation Z, the latest generation who's into the workforce, who has more commonalities in terms of across the globe because there's more globalization lately. I think it's important to kind of take that into consideration before we just say, hey, these are baby boomers. Baby boomers is a US concept. It doesn't apply to India or Sri Lanka, right? So I think it's important to relate to those.
I think if without calling anything out, I from what I've learned is that you can categorize these differences into like how do you communicate with them. Different generations like different communication styles. Two is how do you share work, right? And maybe I'm sure there's more. Three is how do you share feedback? Like what is the mechanism to share feedback and how would it be accepted? There's no one size fits all nowadays. So you should know who you're working with and tailor your approach and mix blend these styles to cater to that. Um, would you agree with that?
Yep. I'd also probably comment that absolutely you can't like one size fits all, but it's a really funny phenomenon that when you look at the generations globally, even if the name doesn't fit, like you mentioned, baby boomer doesn't fit for anyone other than US because of the meaning of the word baby boomer. But if you really look at the characteristics of the generation, there's always exceptions to every rule. But at a sort of an averaged out level, there are so many similarities in globally in all generations. Like if you look at the current generation, there are wars broken out everywhere, and there are revolutions going on everywhere, including like Sri Lanka. We just went through a revolution, and so there's this weird commonality in the times, and the people somehow all over the world that are born in that time seem to all experience a sort of a similar movement in the way the universe is expanding. So during the, for instance, the baby boomers, other parts like even Sri Lanka went through independence and all that stuff. So it's that's that strange phenomenon as well.
It's like kind of like understanding, going in with a more open mindset, like that. Yes, there are differences, like to Denali's point, why there are like a lot of commonalities or like overlaps too, right? I think like in nature, like we are kind of built into like have like stereotypic viewpoints, right? And it's not necessarily like a bad thing all the time. Like it's good to know that there are differences, but I think like as long as you're open to embracing those differences, like that's kind of like the mindset you should have. Like, so like you are essentially like learning from someone else. Like it doesn't matter like their age group, whether in either direction, right?
I think that mindset of learning, no matter what age, what generation, if we can all go in with that mindset, we'll get so much more out of everything,
Exactly.
including generational teams.
I think usually what happens when we talk about multi-generational teams is that there are like common misconceptions or myths, right? And what I've learned is actually, if you like, without just staying at the servers and double click into it and look at it, those are very often debunked, right? For one example, I think what I've heard is like they say baby boomers resist change and struggle with technology. But if you look at now LinkedIn, right, they are the ones who are like more impactful with LinkedIn, right? So they've understood that and leveraged that to their benefit. There's more, I think, right? Have you heard of others like that? Other
I so
misconceptions?
I think it's so unfair actually that comment because I don't think any of our generations have had to been forced through as much change as the baby boomers have. And they've done really well with that. I mean, a little bit of resistance is normal. That's human nature. We all resist change. I don't think anyone's been through as much. Like, they've had to deal with the internet coming out of nowhere. They've even had to, like in Sri Lanka, they didn't even have TVs until we were kids, right? So, and like, I know my parents, there were times they didn't have electricity, and then they've had to go through now with AI. And like I know my dad is constantly trying to learn more, and there's a slowness as well, right, physiologically. But I'm actually blown away by how much they have changed, way more than us.
Way more than us. Exactly.
And think about millennials, right? I mean, if you look at these cohorts, they're like 15 years apart, like between the oldest and youngest in the cohort. Like if you think about millennials, like some millennials may have gone through the 2008 recession we had and the pandemic, and and some millennials may have gone through only one of them, so their experiences and their preferences might be different from one to another. Like one might prefer job security because they saw the 2008 recession, and the others saw went through the pandemic and they got comfortable with the flexible working, so they might value that. So you can't really generalize this stereotyping to the points that you guys were talking about.
That's another fun one I've heard, right? It's that Gen Z has no attention span and can't focus. Have you guys heard that? Well, the reality is that they are so good at multitasking and their ability to process information is much quicker than even we can understand. So their decision making is a lot better. And
I
which
mean,
is
they
a
are very focused, but when it's something that inspires them, because that
yes.
generation is very much into to what Asanka said about that you can't generalize as well. So my older son Jordan, who's in Gen Z, I keep saying he's like 16 going on 60 because honestly he's more mature than me and sometimes my parents. So that's true.
One thing I have noticed, especially folks in my team, right? Yes, they consume a lot of TikTok, like bite-sized information. But to your point, Denali, if they find something that interests them, they are the ones who are like, look on YouTube and researching and reading up
Mm.
on stuff so that they have a really deep understanding of that topic, which is very cool, right?
Yeah, a thirst for knowledge.
Yeah.
Whereas we were sort of like, we were in the generation, we were to school and we're like, please tell us what we should think. And they teach us how to think. And these guys are like, nope, I'm going to find out for myself.
Cool. Let's move on to strategies for success. Like as leaders who lead teams with multi-generational people, how do we lead them better?
Yeah, before we dive into that, a quick message to our viewers. If you enjoy these types of discussions and topics, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And also, we would also like you to comment on our viewpoints to bring in like your fresh perspectives, so that we can either learn from that or like have a extended conversation around things. So let's go into the strategies part.
So I want to start with an analogy. Like for me, the right strategy is like a ribbon cake. So a ribbon cake has multiple layers. So you have different generations that bring their own kind of flavor. But if you do it right, it's gonna taste awesome. Like you're gonna get the best out of everybody to drive the organizational outcomes. I think that's what the strategy should look like and taste like with the multi-generational approach in my mind.
I like that a lot. I'm
Ribbon
hungry
cake.
now.
I know, I was just thinking.
I would, sorry. So I think just to kind of from what we were discussing a little while ago, right? Like kind of using some of those examples as how to kind of leverage that understanding to convert them into strategies on how to combat them or like handle them better, right? The traditional consistencies are not applicable anymore, right? Like you need to have like a very fluid work environment, right? When it comes to and that itself is multidimensional, right? Like if you talk about communication, you cannot have like a consistent communication across like the team members, like from a management style, from like training aspects, work-life balance, and we can kind of deep dive into some of these aspects based on our experiences too. I think like everything has to have like a more dynamic, still like a structured approach, but it cannot be like one set standard across like these multiple dimensions.
Agreed. One thing I would say is, as a leader, first being aware of this, right? Understanding the strengths that these different generations bring. Like, for example, like we just said, the Gen Zs are like fast thinkers. They bring that they embrace technology. They make decisions faster versus the boomers and us. I think we have what Gen X. I think right. We have some deep institutional knowledge. The combination is very powerful, right? So I think there we have to learn to build that culture of mutual respect, I think, right? Where we pair them so that there's cross generational mentoring, reverse mentoring sometimes, right? Promote psychological safety in team discussions. All ideas are respected and we can spar on them. And then also maybe like even for these meetings, like blend it. Some meetings, some people can go into the office and still join the meeting. People can be remote. They don't have to have their video on. It's okay, right? Everyone is welcome. So I think that is also important, right? We should embrace these kind of differences. What else?
So multi-generational teams isn't a new thing, right? It's always been multi-generational teams. I think what's new for us to deal with is how much things changed because things started to change so quickly. And so that caused, these a wider berth between them. But then a weird thing that happens, for instance, in my organization is where my oldest team member is 60, 65, and the youngest is 21, and there's everything in between. Now, the 65-year-old obviously reports to me because I'm the managing director, right? So I realized that a lot of those the settings that we had with how we deal with older people and how we deal with younger people, it's very you just have to reset completely because I'm her
Yeah.
boss.
Yeah.
And again, I would say she's obviously baby boomer, but she's done so well at that. And so, like, that's, I think, something new that we're dealing with in our current multi-generational teams, which wasn't there previously. Because before, by and large, old people meant higher in the hierarchy, and younger meant you're just entering. Whereas now you have like 15-year-old entrepreneurs with adults in their team. So that's really like revolutionary change that we're having to navigate, and it's not easy to navigate. We're still learning, and we need to talk about how to navigate. I don't feel it gets talked about.
Yeah, I think to your point right there, especially I think Roshan, you mentioned about mentoring and reverse mentoring. That doesn't mean like reverse mentoring doesn't mean a younger person mentoring somebody who's older. I think mentoring and reverse mentoring really should mean like in terms of the skill and knowledge. You
Sharing,
know,
knowledge sharing. Yeah.
knowledge sharing, right? How you apply
Right.
that. Like I think age should not be like to me like age is almost like invisible. Like you should not look at it. It's about like what do you bring to the table? What differences do you have? Like you brought up the point that we should have open communication. So part of that is kind of understanding how do you prefer to be communicated? How do you prefer to be engaged? I would say like take a go point beyond and not just think about the organizational nuances but also think about your customer base. Like you might be dealing with customers who are of different generations, and you are like you can't have like if somebody says I only like to text and you are dealing with important customer who's a generation X and who wants to have a person face to face meeting, like that's not going to work out, right? I think you need to be like customer centric and you know train people across different communication channels, like how to engage, how to win trust, and how to win business. And the same thing should be, bred within the organization as well.
And another thing that has worked for me is I love mixing these teams up, right? But I give the team a single goal. This is the outcome that we're expecting. And then let them collaborate and spar and figure out creative solutions for these things, right? And sometimes some really, really clever solutions come out of them. So, yeah.
I think the other thing for me is a lot of the time, especially with this newer generations, let's say what we call Gen Zs and Gen Ys are in the industry as well. They're more inspired by things that sort of that mean something to them. Like if they want to feel like they're giving something that of value to the world. It's not just about having security or it's higher up in that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. These generations are in that self-actualization. They want purpose. They want um, and they're also multi-talented. We all are, but they are more aware of the fact that the giftings that they have need to do something. Like they're there for a purpose, whereas we kind of just threw it away. Well, not all of us, but in general, they're more aware. And then so what I find is, and loyalty is an issue, right? We talked about it when we had a conversation before, because in the previous generations it was very common to be like 40 years employed. You start work and end your career in the same organization. Extremely common. It was, in fact, it was the way. If you were someone that skipped around, it was frowned upon. Whereas now that's not the case. It's like 1 year, 2 years, and you're on the move. So, how do you retain loyalty? I found that a really good way to do that is to create a culture where they can bring their whole selves. So, no more compartmentalizing. Like, I know, especially as a female in the corporate world, I had to compartmentalize myself. I had to show up in a way that was unnatural to me. So then I brought that knowledge into my company, and I found it works so well, especially with the younger generation. Like I have most of my team started with me when I started 5 years ago, and they're still with me, which is unheard of in the tech industry, and especially with a startup, right? So yeah, that's a huge one. I think if we can create a culture where people can be themselves and bring their whole self.
I mean, that's an amazing example, And
Yeah.
I just to add that I don't think the new generations are, disloyal. I think they are more aspirational and they have
Mm,
more opportunities.
yes.
And the fact that you came up with a strategy to retain them, I think that speak to the value that you bring. So that's a really cool example. Thank you for sharing.
Right. I think bringing like that positive attitude to the work culture like is what we are talking about, right? Like so instead of like trying to focus on like the negative side of like a difference, like how do we use it for our advantage, right? Like how do we make like the all generations feel like more inclusive in terms of like they do bring in value, right? It's a matter of like recognizing it, like appreciating it, and also giving them more and more opportunities to kind of like work along those lines. It's just like being being open to the idea, being embracing it, and making sure everyone is everyone is leveraged like the right way.
You
I,
know, it's what Roshan said about the mutual respect thing is that we're used to respect upwards, but we're not used to the respect downwards. But I find if you actually do, even with your children, if you, we weren't from a generation where you respect your children, but I believe that you need to respect your children and you get so much more out of the relationship. It's the same at work. And I find that if you have that respect, if you're coming in thinking that just like you, they can teach you as much as you can teach them,
Hmm.
I think you just create a completely different environment where people want to come to work and people are inspired. And like we went through a generation where you could do this like motivation thing, right? Motivation is in outside in. It's like you're giving external inputs to create an energy from a person. And we had these motivational speakers and we had this like motivational team building stuff. That stuff doesn't work as well anymore now because people are very much more inside out. They want the purpose. They want to be inspired. So it's harder to motivate if the inspiration isn't there. So how do we create inspiration then? How do we tap into what they've got inside them?
Denali, I want to also talk about another thing you brought up earlier about meaningful work. That is so, so true, right? And I'm seeing that all the time. In the past, like if you were to tell someone like maybe a baby boomer or a Gen X person like me to do a task, we would sometimes blindly go try to execute this task, right? And then come back for feedback. Whereas the generation now, they want to know the why. Why are we doing this? What problem am I solving? What is the desired outcome? And then that starts this creative energy flowing, and the solutions are amazing, right? And that's why I like this combination of the two. But I think that is so important. The why you're doing something is so important now.
That's so true. And you know, the funny thing is, we're complaining about that just this generation is that way. But we're the ones who started that conversation. It was our generation that started asking the whys. And this generation came into a world that was already asking. So that's why they're sort of flying with it. Whereas we're like, if you look at Simon Sinek, like his whole thing was, what is your why? Like that. Because
Yeah,
so it was us who started. And I
Yeah.
think our generation, the way we are, is a response to conversations that were started by the generation that came before. It's
exactly.
actually beautiful if you look at it.
What about conflicts? Have you ever had to deal with any conflicts?
I'll let
I personally like the way I look at them. I don't attribute like conflicts or differences to generations because then you're kind of generalizing and stereotyping it. I
Mm.
would take it as something with that individual and then try to address that at that level, as opposed to thinking like everyone in that cohort is like having this problem, right? That's my approach to the conflicts when they arise.
Yeah, there's something called like unconscious bias, right? Like biases. Like so, like I think sometimes it's difficult to like come out of that like unless like you get like proper training around it as well. Like so, I think the right training goes a long way into conflict resolution in too, as it applies to anything in the industry.
I don't think conflict, I think probably, like you said, Asanka, conflict hasn't changed, I think, with the generations. Conflict is what it is, and it's always been. And I don't think the ways to deal with it has changed really. It's still the same. Um, it's still the respect. I think being self-aware is a big thing. So a problem that we've had, for instance, with some of the leaders we've worked with, because we've worked with great leaders and then we work with ones we don't like, would be, I would say the ones I really like were ones that are self-aware and open to feedback, where it wasn't all about where I'm not showing up, but they're willing to also look into where they're not showing up. So I think that for me makes a much better leadership conversation than some of the leaders you have where it's like they're always right and you're always wrong. It's the same thing applies with parenting as well. I think that ability to say, "My bad, I messed up, I didn't do that." Because like for me with a startup, right, for instance, I've gone through periods where cash flow was a major issue. In the beginning, the first 1 to 3 years, we've had situations where a client signed up to $100,000 project and then they don't pay their bills. They're on a monthly payment and they're like 5 months behind. And that's a issue for us for cash flow. And I've had staff who've had their electricity cut because I couldn't pay their salaries on time. right? Because you have some who are living hand to mouth. And if I were, I mean, I can't be defensive about that. I mean, it was an issue from the companies. I tapped into my savings and gave them loans. I've done stuff like that. I mean, and these are people who are still with me, and they've been through like hell to stay with me.
I think that speaks volumes, Denali, of what you've built. You're building a culture, a workplace culture of trust and respect. And when you have that, there may be shortcomings, but as long as you have that, people will stay loyal with you through thick and thin. That saying is true, right?
Yeah,
So kudos to you
absolutely.
on that.
And also, if they don't, because there are people who couldn't handle it and left, okay, I mean, fair enough. It's a real issue. So, like, I think just being self-aware and willing to accept when you mess up as a leader is a big deal. And the other thing I think is not being averse to people wanting to leave the organization. Like this question of disloyalty.
Hmm.
Should they be loyal to you or should they be loyal to themselves? Like,
Yeah.
honestly. And when COVID hit, which organizations were loyal to their staff who'd been loyal to them for like decades, right? So why are we asking them? Like, would I want my child to be loyal to some organization that I know does only sees them as a number? So what is that? It's like, okay, give them a reason to stay, but if they want to go, I mean, they have a right to do that. It's their life. Good on
The
them.
way I spot on, the way I think of it is also the world is small now, right? So maybe they right now this is not the right opportunity for them and they see something better at a different place. But who knows? They might come back, right? If
Absolutely.
you if they felt that they were valued, they were heard, and they did great work, but now they want something else, they might come back wanting that same feeling. So for me, even if they leave, I am still supporting. I'm still supporting, cheering them on from the sidelines because you never know. I might join a different company and that person might be there, right? You never know.
Person. And I know real world examples is coming up, but I actually have a situation like that.
Let's go. Yeah.
He left, he was gone for about 12 months, and then he came back at a slightly higher position, but he'd learned so much that he could never have learned in a small startup like mine. He went to a large organization, learned such a lot of things, came back with that knowledge, and we are so much richer for it. Like, honestly, his leaving and coming back probably did more to accelerate us in 3 months than if he had stayed. So, just being open is a big.
Yeah. You guys have any other examples to share?
Well, I don't have, I haven't worked for a startup, so I've been working in the large industries. So one of the things I did in one of my previous organization, this is not related to generational thing, but I just set up a employee resource group for innovation. But guess what? It really worked out, and I think it worked out really well because we had people from all generations coming in and contributing like with different perspectives. So there are like that great ideas that came out of it, that went on to get prioritized and implemented in the organization. I want to really attribute that to the diversity and the different thinking that the people brought into it. And it was not like just because it's an innovation thing, like only millennials joined, right? There were people across the board, like they're all inspired to come up with something new.
So
Something.
that was this.
Sorry, go ahead, Dinal.
No, so there was this. I used to be involved with the Chamber of Commerce in Perth when I lived there, and one of the events that I brought in was bringing corporate problems and then bringing in like mixing up uni, first year uni, and high school kids. Well, first of all, it's good for them because they're getting to meet the corporate sector. So it was almost like a coming together of the incoming generation with the existing, right? And so what we did was bring our problems to the table and we have a mix with the kids at the table. And let's see what solutions they come up with because they are completely unprogrammed. And it was so amazing. It was ridiculous how outside the box. We think we're being outside the box, but we're just a bigger box. That's all it is. And then you bring them and they're just like they come up with these crazy things. If you are open to it, it's just madness how smart they are. Just they're just high school kids. So
I was going to say, like, I once helped develop like a process. It's kind of like to, I think different companies, some companies have this in different flavors, kind of a thing, right? To get like more frequent feedback or like get an insight as to employee energy levels, right? So you're not like some companies follow like traditional like a annual review process, like part of like the performance review, right? So me and like a group of others like came up with this idea. We would maintain like an energy meter across like the organization, but at the team levels, but we want to do it at like a monthly level, right? So I know that we all hate like doing performance reviews and writing all these paragraphs and whatnot, right? So we did not want to have like an approach like that, but kind of took like a more gamification type of like an approach. Quick questions like yes or no type of answers. That'll kind of like your answers will kind of derive like your energy level based on that. And then that gets kind of shared with like the managers or like the management, so that like they can have like individual conversations. If you are seeing like month to month, like if your energy levels are going down, like something is wrong, right? Whether there's like something going on like on the personal side, or like the work they're doing is not being effective. If it is varying, like 1 month it's high, 1 month it's low, so then you can trace back to which months are low, why, like is it specific to certain types of work. So like it helped like maintain that adaptable culture, and like you refine your work assignments and like kind of what everything like we kind of talked about this. That was kind of interesting to kind of build that, which was like a fun project actually.
Very cool. Shall we wrap it up there? This was really fun. I didn't expect it to be this fun. Thank you for
Absolutely.
joining us again, Denali, and thank you for sharing all these examples. Really enjoyed hearing about it.
Pleasure. It
Thank
was
you.
fun.
Hoping to bring you back again, or like
Absolutely.
for another fun topic.
Now that I've cracked the ice, yes. I've never done a podcast before, so
There you go. All right,
Awesome.
so let's wrap it up. All right, so like everybody else, so thank you, Dinali, for joining us for this episode and making it special. You made it much more awesome for us. And we started by introducing her and Astro, right? The curious member of Mama Nap. Everybody has to go and find it out. We spoke about why do multi-generational teams matter, right? Because we work in a era when there are 4 to 5 different generations working in the same organization. And then we spoke about understanding the differences, like why are they created and why do we need to be aware of them and not stereotype. And we spoke about coming up with strategies like having good communication, having open mindedness, respecting people. And then we covered some really good real world examples. So I think that's kind of the summary.
Good stuff. Thank you,
thanks, guys.
everyone. See you in the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.